In Magic, the less mana you have to pay for a spell, the better. As a result, 1-mana creatures often form the backbone of lots of creature-based strategies. So today, we're going over some of the best 1-mana creatures in all of Magic. Starting off this list at number 10, we have Monastery Swiftspear. Swiftspear is a 1/2 human monk that costs 1 red and has haste, meaning it can attack as soon as it enters the battlefield, and prowess, meaning it gets a +1/+1 until the end of the turn, each time you cast a non-creature spell. There are only a handful of 1-mana creatures with haste and more than 1 power, and they all have some downside to balance it out. Swiftspear, on the other hand, can easily have 2 or more power the turn it comes down, and has no downsides at all. This allows red aggro decks to push out a lot more damage than they normally would. Now, before we talk about how good Swiftspear is in aggro decks, we should go over her twin, Soulscar Mage. Soulscar Mage has the same stats and mana cost as Swiftspear, but trades haste for an ability, where your burn spells deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters instead, which is a nice ability, but it's hard to turn down an ability as impactful as haste. Ultimately, which one we put on this list doesn't matter too much though, as just about every deck that plays Swiftspear also plays Soulscar Mage right alongside it. Both of these creatures are really popular choices in burn decks in Modern and Pioneer, where the prowess keyword can push them up to 3 and even 4 power on certain turns. While they are good in burn, the deck they shine the most in, and why Swiftspear made on this list over Goblin Guide, another great red aggro creature, is the role Swiftspear plays in Izzet Prowess and other similar decks. Izzet Prowess is a deck that tries to play a bunch of cheap creatures whose powers grow when you cast spells, cast a bunch of cheap spells, and then swing in for tons of damage. Versions of these decks have been popular in Modern for a while, with different builds cropping up over the years, but Monastery Swiftspear has been a constant fixture. All in all, Swiftspear is a great aggro creature, but being a powerful threat in aggro decks isn't enough to make it higher than number 10 on this list with such stiff competition. And at number 9, we have Allosaurus Shepherd. Shepherd is a 1/1 elf shaman that costs 1 green that can't be countered, makes it so all your other green spells can't be countered, and has an ability where if you pay 4 and 2 green, all of your elves become 5/5 dinosaurs until the end of the turn. Allosaurus Shepherd does a lot for a single mana. Not only does it protect all of your future spells, if you're in an elves deck, its activated ability might as well just win you the game, because elves decks excel at flooding the board with lots of little creatures. Shepherd is a house in Legacy Elves, the only deck where it's really seen competitive success. The idea behind Legacy Elves is to use Glimpse of Nature, which lets you draw a card every time you cast a creature, to flood the board while keeping your hand full, and use elves like Heritage Druid to let you use all the elves you're casting as mana to play even more elves. Shepherd both protects all the deck's plays from the ever-present threat of 0-mana counterspells that are the backbone of Legacy. It also gives the deck another solid win condition of Caterhoof Behemoth. One really important note about this card is that it makes all of your green spells uncounterable, and not just your creatures like some other similar green spells do, which is even more important when using cards like Natural Order. Natural Order is a 4-mana green sorcery that makes you sacrifice a green creature to find another green creature from your deck and put it directly into the field. This is a great effect as it lets you turn any old elf into a Caterhoof for just 4 mana. One downside of the card though, is that sacrificing a creature as part of its cost, not part of its effect, so if it gets countered you end up getting 2 for 1. This makes Shepherd's ability to make it uncounterable much more important, especially considering how a single Natural Order can easily win you the game. So if Allosaurus Shepherd is so good, why is it only successful in one deck? Well, the problem is where it was printed. You see, Allosaurus Shepherd was printed in Jumpstart, a supplemental set that did not go through Standard. This means the card is not legal in Modern or Pioneer, and is only legal in Commander, Legacy, and Vintage. If Allosaurus Shepherd was legal in formats like Modern, it might actually end up being too good, which is probably why Wizards printed it in Jumpstart to begin with. And at number 8, we have Elvish Reclaimer. This is a 1/2 elf warrior with a mana cost of 1 green, and the abilities where it gets +2/+2 if you have at least 3 lands in your graveyard, and you can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a land to go find another land from your deck and put it into the field tap. Now, Elvish Reclaimer may look kinda bad at first. After all, if you have to put 6 mana into making it a 3/4, it isn't worth it. And is it really worth trying to mill a bunch of cards to make your Reclaimer bigger? The thing is, there are a few lands in Magic that change this math quite a bit. First off, there are fetch lands. Lands that let you pay 1 life to sacrifice them to go find another land from your deck with specific land types and put them directly into play. This makes the math on Reclaimer much better. In fact, if you play fetch lands on your first 2 turns, play Reclaimer on your first turn, and activate it on your second, you'll be able to get 3 lands into your graveyard by turn 2. Now, the ease at which you can fill Reclaimer's requirements does make it better, but what really makes this card strong is all the powerful lands you can search out. You see, while all lands normally do is let you play your other cards, there are quite a few lands that have powerful effects all on their own. In fact, some decks have made finding the right lands their win condition. Legacy Lands is able to use a combination of Dark Depths and Thespian Stage to make a 20/20 indestructible flyer as early as turn 3, and Reclaimer can help them do it. How the combo works is that you use Thespian Stage to copy your Dark Depths, which will give you a copy of Dark Depths with no counters on it. Now that you have Dark Depths with no counters on it, Dark Depths will sacrifice itself and make you a Merit Lage. Elvish Reclaimer does have to compete with other good land tutors, but its ability to gum up the board while also finding your combo pieces makes it a uniquely powerful card. And at number 7, we have Noble Hierarch. This is a 0/1 human druid that costs 1 green, has Exalted, meaning that whenever one of your creatures attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn, and you can tap it to gain a green, white, or blue mana. And before we go much further, we should bring up Ignoble Hierarch, which is almost identical to Noble Hierarch. It just taps for different colors and has a different creature type. So everything I'm going to say here also applies to it, just for different decks. Now, Noble Hierarch is on this list for being one of the best mana dorks in the game. Generally speaking, the two best effects in all of Magic are drawing more cards and getting more mana, as these allow you to gain mana and card advantage over your opponent, which allows you to simply do more things than they can. Mana Dorks are the name for cheap creatures that tap for mana, and they have a history of being extremely strong, especially the 1 mana ones. Noble Hierarch's ability to tap for multiple different colors of mana instantly sets it apart from other 1 mana Mana Dorks. One of the few other Mana Dorks that has the ability to tap for more than one color is Birds of Paradise. Another strong card in its own right, but the thing that Noble Hierarch has that Birds doesn't is Exalted. Exalted allows it to put out extra damage, even if it's tapped, as you can attack with one other creature and Exalted will trigger. This makes Noble Hierarch even better at putting out extra damage than most Mana Dorks with higher power, as you're much more likely to have better attacks by making your good creatures bigger than having a small and easily blocked creature. All of these things together make Noble Hierarch, and by extension Ignoble Hierarch, the best Mana Dorks in the game, with one very notable exception we'll be talking about later. And at number 6, we have Esper Sentinel. Esper Sentinel is a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier with a mana cost of 1 white, and the ability where whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you draw a card unless they pay mana equal to Sentinel's power. The Sentinel is a great fusion of a stacks piece and a card draw spell. Drawing an extra card each turn if your opponent casts a non-creature spell is good. And forcing your opponent to pay even 1 extra mana for their spells is also great. One weakness is that it's your opponents that gets to choose which downside they have to deal with, which is always worse than letting you get to choose. It's so much worse that these cards, which would otherwise be broken, just end up being okay. Still, each of these effects is so above rate on a 1 mana creature that even if you end up getting the worst one for any board state, it's still strong enough to be backbreaking for your opponent. Esper is a card that your opponent needs to kill as soon as it comes down, because if it sticks around, it's going to generate way too much value for you. Where Sentinel shines over other must-kill threats is that its ability is kind of a form of protection, as you either get your cards back or force your opponent to pay more for the removal spell. Esper Sentinel sees a good amount of play in Modern and Historic in a bunch of different decks, as its ability is really generic and the kind of thing that a lot of decks are interested in. And at number 5, we have Death's Shadow. This is a 13/13 avatar with a mana cost of 1 black, and the downside where it gets -X/-X, where X is your life total. Death's Shadow is a card that's obviously pretty strong if you can make it work, but getting your life total low enough in time for Death's Shadow to be a threat is a bit of a challenge. So, how do people make Death's Shadows a threat? It starts with the lands. Fetch lands, as we've already mentioned, let you go find lands with certain land types and put them into play. The thing is, because of the way they're worded, you can actually go find non-basic lands with land types and put them right onto the field, and the best ones to find are the shock lands. The shock lands are lands with land types that enter tapped unless you pay 2. What this means is that if you use a fetch land to go find an untapped shock land, you'll lose a total of 3 life. This is a great start, but Death Shadow's decks have combined these lands with a few spells that require paying life to help them get below 13 life as fast as possible. One of the best is Thoughtseize, a 1 mana black sorcery that lets you rip any non-land card from your opponent's hand, with the downside of losing 2 life. Turning the downside of one of black's best staples into an upside means that 1, Thoughtseize in a Death Shadow's deck is maybe the strongest opening in any Magic deck. There are a few other cards that Death Shadow's decks have used over the years, though their popularity has waxed and waned more than Thoughtseize. One really interesting card is Temur Battle Rage. Temur is a 2-mana instant that gives target creature double strike, meaning it gets a free hit before combat damage, then it deals normal combat damage, and if you have a creature with 4 or more power, it gains trample, letting it deal excess combat damage to the defending player. Combat tricks, instants that give stats and keywords to creatures, are a big part of Magic, but they usually aren't very good in competitive formats due to the inherent card disadvantage and potential for blowout from removal. However, Temur Battle Rage was a big part of Death Shadow's decks in Modern for quite some time, due to the ability for a 6/6 Death Shadow to easily one-shot your opponent off of a single Temur Battle Rage. Death Shadow decks have been successful in both Modern and Legacy for years, going through multiple different evolutions from red, black, green, or Jund variants with Tarmogoyf, to red, black, blue, or Grixis variants with Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, and they'll continue to evolve as the years pass by. And at number 4, we have Delver of Secrets. Delvers of Secrets is a 1/1 human wizard with a mana cost of 1 blue, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your deck. And if it's an instant or sorcery, you can reveal it and transform it into an Insectide Aberration, a 3/2 human insect with flying, meaning it can only be blocked by other creatures with flying. Delver of Secrets has been the backbone of aptly named Delver decks in Legacy. These decks seek to beat their opponent down with Insectile Aberrations and other cheap, efficient threats such as Brazen Borrower, while protecting them with free counterspells like Force of Will and Daze, and dealing with opposing threats with cheap removal. In order to make sure that your Delvers flip over, Delver decks run already amazing cantrips like Brainstorm and Ponder to put instants and sorceries back on top of their library, where their Delvers will be able to find them during your upkeep, at least in Legacy. For a long time, Delver was considered the best 1-mana beater in the game, but it's recently had to compete for that title with a new card. And at number 3, we have Dragon's Rage Channeler. Channeler is a 1/1 human shaman with a mana cost of 1 red that has the abilities where, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you look at the top card of your library, where you can put it into your graveyard, and if there are 4 or more card types amongst the cards in your graveyard, Dragon Rage Channeler gets +2/+2, has flying, and attacks each combat if able. Channeler is a very similar card to Delver of Secrets, having a similar stat line both before and after you turn it on, so to speak. There are a few differences though, and they end up making Dragon Rage Channeler a little more successful than Delver. First off, Channeler's ability to manipulate the top card of your deck is an extra bit of value that Delver doesn't give you. Secondly, Channeler's requirement of having 4 different types in your graveyard usually takes a bit longer than Delver's to turn on, but it's more consistent. Especially since, once you get the 4 card types in your graveyard, they're there for the rest of the game, and all of your Channelers will get the bonuses for the rest of the game, whereas each of your Delvers have to be flipped individually. But the thing that really puts Channeler over Delver on this list is how much easier it is to turn Channeler on in Modern. As I said previously, there aren't any good cantrips in Modern, though a big part of this is the fact that all the cantrips that were in Modern got banned for being way too good. As a result, Channeler is seeing a lot more play than Delver is, as setting up your graveyard is a lot easier than setting up the top card of your library in Modern. Now, you could probably shift the placement of these 2 cards around, as if Ponder or Preordain came off the Modern ban list, Delver would probably see as much play as Channeler does in the format. And in Legacy, where both cards are strong, both cards usually play alongside each other anyway. So all around, Dragon Rage Channeler and Delver of Secrets are both similarly powerful cards. And at number 2, we have Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. Ragavan is a 2/1 monkey pirate with a mana cost of 1 red, and the abilities where, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. You exile the top card of their library, and you can cast that card for the rest of the turn. A treasure token is an artifact token that you can tap and sacrifice for 1 mana of any color. It also has dash for 1 and 1 red, which means when you pay its cost, it gains haste and returns to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Ragavan is one of the most pushed cards in the entire game. Not only does this card have a great stat line, as a 1 mana 2/1 is the best stat line the creature can reasonably have without some kind of downside, with very few creatures having better stat lines than that. Now, as I said before, the 2 strongest things you can do in Magic, generally speaking, is draw cards and make more mana. Ragavan does both each time it hits your opponent, though the draw it gives you does have some relevant downsides, as only getting access to a card for 1 turn is bad. Additionally, the cards in your opponent's deck are often worse for you than the ones from your own deck, because if they were good in your deck, you'd be playing them. Sometimes you'll be getting cards that are only really good in specific decks. Like, for example, Goblin Electromancer, which is good for decks that like to cast lots of instants and sorceries, but not much else. However, there's still a good chance to hit a staple in your opponent's deck that's just generally good. So, you're getting a slightly subpar card on advantage and an extra mana every time you manage to hit your opponent. This is a level of value that no other 1 mana creature really gets you. If your opponent opens a Ragavan, you kind of have to kill it right away, because if you don't, they'll likely be able to drown you in card and mana advantage. Even if you play out a blocker, they'll probably just be able to kill it on the next turn anyway. Ragavan's ability to run away with the game was good enough that it ended up getting banned in Legacy, though it's still not quite as a meta-defining threat as the number 1 on this list. And at number 1, we have Deathrite Shaman. Deathrite Shaman is a 1/2 elf shaman with a mana cost of 1, a hybrid black/green, and the abilities where you can tap it with no mana cost to exile a land from your graveyard to add 1 mana of any color, tap it and pay 1 black to exile an instant or sorcery from a graveyard to make target player lose 2 life, or tap it and pay 1 green to exile a creature from the graveyard to gain 2 life. Deathrite Shaman is sometimes called a 1-mana planeswalker due to its versatility and tendency to snowball in value. Deathrite is a mana dork that also lets you control the cards in your graveyard, and even get some free damage onto your opponent, or buffer your life total to help against burn. There are a few things that make Deathrite Shaman stand out amongst other mana dorks, like Noble Hierarch, and one of them is actually its mana cost. Costing hybrid mana means that Deathrite Shaman is incredibly easy to cast, and decks that ran it were able to have the mana for it turn 1 every single game, and then cast other color-intensive cards like Hymn to Torok without breaking a sweat, something that would be much more difficult with other mana dorks. Removing the threat from your opponent's graveyard before they can cheat them out with cards like Reanimate was also super helpful. One thing worth noting is that Deathrite Shaman gets more powerful the stronger the format it's in. The biggest reason is the presence of fetch lands, which lets you activate Deathrite Shaman's mana ability extremely consistently, whereas in weaker formats without fetch lands, like Pioneer, Deathrite's power level is much lower. In fact, formats like Legacy and Modern where fetch lands are legal, Deathrite Shaman is banned for making 4-color decks way too consistent and powerful. Ultimately, while Deathrite Shaman doesn't take over games quite as much as Ragavan does, the impact it has on the viability of decks is so great that it's easily the best 1-drop creature in all of Magic. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any other amazing 1-mana creatures that I might have missed? Or do you have ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, I'd love to hear about those things down in the comments.